Thank you. And at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me, though at a short notice, to present a paper in this seminar. But then, as this is a topic which is close to my heart, I accepted it immediately because this is a field which is generally neglected, but is extremely important to understand the history and culture of any part of the country. So inscriptions, as we know, is a branch which is the data which comes under the branch called as epigraphy, and we also study inscriptions when we study paleography. Many of us know, actually I am not aware of the uh, basic background of the students or the participants who are sitting in the hall, but then just for the clarification of people, like epigraphy is a discipline which studies the content of the inscriptions, and paleography is the discipline which studies the form of the inscriptions or the ancient writings. So whatever you are seeing here on the screen is an inscription which was written in Brahmi. I don't know whether all of you know this word Brahmi or not, because this could, I understand that we can have a varied audience in the hall. So Brahmi is the script which we have in India, coming right from at least 4th, 3rd centuries BC, and which can be considered as the mother script of all the Indian scripts. Here we have epigraphy or the inscriptions as one of the source to understand the history of the culture, history of the country. Even though we are talking about Maharashtra, this can be applied to every part, every state of the country. So as we know that there are at least 3 sources to understand, to reconstruct the history of any country, and that is literary sources, material and oral traditions. So among the material sources, we have a very important source called as the inscriptions, which can be stone inscriptions or copper plates or even wooden or even terracotta inscriptions also. Other than this, the use of Brahmi script can be seen in the case of the coins, about which Dr. Balsekar is going to talk about after me. So here we just understood the disciplines called as epigraphy and paleography. In India, we have the earliest inscriptions coming from the Harappan civilization, and many of you must be aware of this particular inscription which we had found at Dholavira. And even though there are some claims of deciphering this script, the Harappan script, which it is not actually convincingly deciphered as yet. I would not talk anything in front of Professor Shinde, who is a stalwart of the field. But then regarding Brahmi, you should know that even though it was the earliest script, the mother script of all the Indian scripts, we had forgotten it completely. And then it had to be deciphered and then that decipherment came in 1837 when James Prinsep, who was a mint master or an assay master in the mint at Kolkata, he deciphered Brahmi with the help of various coins, bilingual coins and all, and then from that point we could understand whatever was written in those numerous inscriptions. Thousands of inscriptions were there in front of us, but then we could not understand them because they were written in Brahmi and the script could not be read. But then, as some of you might know, that James Prinsep deciphered this in 1837. This script was written from left to right, just as we write Devanagari today. Devanagari is, of course, the descendant of Brahmi. Then we find these inscriptions all over the country, also in Maharashtra. And then we find that even though the script was there, the languages that were used were Prakrit and Sanskrit languages to write these inscriptions. Prakrit is not one language. Prakrit is a group of languages, and which were the regional languages that were spoken in various parts of the country in those days. And then these inscriptions are found at many places, like on the rocks, pillars, walls, pedestals of the images, copper plates, coins, and then even relic caskets, etc. Similarly, at the same time in India, we see the existence of another script called as Kharoshthi script in the northwestern regions of the country. That is modern Pakistan, Afghanistan regions, Punjab also, to a certain extent. But this script was also deciphered because we had forgotten that script also. And it was also deciphered by James Prinsep at around the same time. But then this script was written from right to left, not like Brahmi. This was written from right to left. And then we also see the use of Prakrit languages and Sanskrit for writing Kharoshthi script. For writing Sanskrit, Kharoshthi was not enough because Kharoshthi doesn't have enough vowel signs to indicate the exact pronunciations of the Sanskrit words, and that is why we find that over the period Kharoshthi died out and no script came out of Kharoshthi or descended from Kharoshthi. From Brahmi, we see now that all the Indian scripts have descended, and now it is the mother script for all the Indian scripts today. But then, just like Brahmi inscriptions, we find Kharoshthi inscriptions at various places all over the country. In Maharashtra, we do not have any Kharoshthi inscription unless it is a coin. We do not find Kharoshthi inscriptions written on monuments, etc. Along with the stone inscriptions, we also have copperplate inscriptions. We also have inscriptions on wood, wooden planks, wooden rafters, etc. But then we also should see the inscriptions coming from the memorial stones or the hero stones called as Veeragala, and we also have some inscriptions on the Sati stones called as Satigala or Mahasatikallu, etc. I hope that you understand the meaning of a hero stone and what a hero stone is. Is there anybody? You don't know what a hero stone is? If not, then please be frank. You are students, so it's not expected from you to know each and everything of archaeology. Do not know. You know. Okay then. I don't see any raised hand about the knowing of hero stones, so I'll go ahead. In Maharashtra, you hardly have inscriptions on the hero stones and Sati stones, but it is not the case that we do not have. We have at Kolhapur, at Khidrapur, in the southern parts of Maharashtra, we do get inscriptions on the hero stones also. And on the Sati stone, we have inscriptions coming in the Devanagari script rather than Brahmi. But then for hero stones, we do see some inscriptions in Kannada also. Kannada script and High Kannada language. So epigraphy helps us to understand in history and culture of any state or any region of the country. It helps you to understand and reconstruct the political or dynastic chronology also. In case of Maharashtra, we see that the history of Maharashtra, political history of Maharashtra has been reconstructed with the help of various inscriptions that we have found in various caves and even in temples, or also in the form of copper plates, etc. So the dynasties like Satavahanas, Western Kshatrapas, Vakatakas, Chalukyas, even Sendrakas, they were ruling in this part of the country, in our state. And then we have the evidence of their rule coming in the form of inscriptions at some monuments, as well as we have got numerous copper plates which were given from various villages or towns which are in Maharashtra, even though the dynasty was a Kannada dynasty. For example, the Chalukyas. We know that the Western Chalukyas were ruling from Badami, which was their capital. But at one point of time, we can see that the Chalukyas were ruling all over the Karnataka up to Narmada, covering even the whole of Maharashtra. In Marathi, we have a saying that Marathi ne kela Kanadi Bhratar. There are so many words in Marathi which are similar to the words in Kannada. But this thing has started right from the period of the Satavahanas, not even Chalukyas. Then also we see that the word even Pulumavi, here the word Pulla means a lion. Pullakeshi, who has hair like a lion. So similarly, we find that there were many words which actually are the Deshi words, or which are the non-Sanskrit words which were used in this part of the country by people in those days. And we find the rule of even the southern rulers in Maharashtra. We also can see the relation of the Chalukyas with the Sendrakas, who were their maternal uncles. The Chalukyas had such a vast territory to rule. So we find that over the Kannada region, in Karnataka, they were ruling by themselves. But for the rule in Maharashtra, especially North Maharashtra, parts of Gujarat, southern Gujarat, Khandesh region, and even in Konkan, they had appointed their maternal uncles, Mama hote त्यांचे, Sendrakas, and they were given the charge of that region. So all these things, this history has come to light only because of the inscriptions that we have had in Maharashtra. The earliest inscription, datable inscription in Maharashtra can be, you know more than me what this is. This is the part of the inscription, the Major Rock Edict, which was issued by Ashoka, and this was found at Sopara in Mumbai, Nala Sopara, and it is preserved in the CSMVS today. So that can be definitely said as the earliest datable inscription in Maharashtra, even though there could be some, but as we do not know the patron, or there is no name of the person who had issued that inscription, we cannot date it properly. So this definitely shows that the Mauryan rule was here in Maharashtra, and even the Pali literature also tells us that Ashoka had appointed a person who to spread the Buddhism, spread the religion, and he was a Yavana Dharma Rakshita. This is also we have to see carefully and think over it. Why had he appointed a Greek person to spread the religion over here? It is very important to know that a Greek person was sent to spread the religion because there were many Greek people living in this particular region. As we see the Indo-Greek trade, which was coming from the Western worlds, and these Yavanas, who were the Ionian Greeks, they were staying in parts of Mumbai in a way, Aparanta, and that is why he had to appoint a person of their own origin to spread the religion, to convince them for the following of Buddhism. So such things come to light only through the inscriptions, and that is supported with many other inscriptions and other evidences also. Similarly, the dynastic patronage also was given to these caves in Maharashtra. One of them is the caves at the cave site of Nashik, where we have many important inscriptions, political inscriptions, which have helped in the reconstruction of Indian history. Not only the history of Maharashtra, but also the history of the country has been reconstructed with the help of the exact dates that we get from these inscriptions. Even the date to fix the beginning of the Shaka era and the patron or the person who had started it has also been given by these inscriptions, and the struggle that we see between the Satavahanas as well as the Western Kshatrapas. So quickly we go ahead and we see that how the inscriptions have helped in the reconstruction of social and economic history also of the state. Here we have many donors who had given patronage for the creation of various parts of the caves or temples, etc. And they had written the inscriptions to record the donations that they had given in those days. So we see the donations given by traders, merchants, householders, monks, nuns, kings, officers, farmers, whatnot. So this particular inscription which you see on the screen, which was the first slide also of my presentation, is also by a Yavana, a Greek person. This is from Karla, and many of you might know that the Karla caves have preserved very important evidence of the donations given by the Greek people for the creation of this particular Chaitya Gruha. They didn't have much money to patronize the whole Chaitya Gruha, so they were giving in small parts. Like somebody had given, this Yashavadhana had given money to create only one pillar. Somebody had given money to make the Gharamukha, that is the frontage of the Chaitya Gruha. Somebody had given money to create the doorway or some sculptures, etc. So even the monks and nuns also were giving donations. That is an interesting thing to note over here. This particular pillar, which has got a flower on it, is also very unique because we find that there was a custom of preserving the relics of a pious person in the pillar near the presence of Buddha himself. So that is why we have this flower in the pillar which has got a hole inside, and the relics were kept inside, and the inscription tells us that the relics were of such and such monk who died probably when the cave was being created. So such interesting references we get from the inscriptions, plus the development in the religion and philosophical conditions in a particular region can also be traced through these inscriptions, because we find the inscriptions on the pedestals of the images, or sometimes there are donations stating clearly what they wanted to do at this particular site. So for example, this case, I am giving a case study of Nashik, where we have in this particular cave an inscription telling us that this cave was donated by a Yavana, again a Greek person who had come from North India. His name and the place was Datta Mitri, and he had given money to create a Chaitya Gruha in a Vihara, which is a unique combination, and we have first epigraphical evidence to have such a combination at a particular site, and it comes through this inscription at Nasik. Even though it could not be completed like what he had wanted, but still we have the inscription telling us the intention behind the creation of this particular cave. We also have many Jain inscriptions, so we need not talk only about the Buddhist ones, but we have Jain inscriptions, we have Hindu or Brahmanical inscriptions also on the pedestals of images. We also have many bronzes. Sometimes we also see yantras kept, now we can see them in museums, and sometimes they are preserved in the shrines, which are not accessible to ordinary people. But then many scholars initially, they had studied them, and now we see the interpretation published in various forms of books or other material. Then we also see an application of epigraphy in the discovery of early historic sites. Sometimes we see the discovery of proto and early historic sites with the help of epigraphical references and the place names that are given in those inscriptions. I am giving a case study of a work which my friends and myself, we were involved in doing. My friend Varada Khalatkar, myself, my colleague Dr. Ambarish Khare, Mrs. Kalpana Rairikar, and my student Anand Kanidkar, all of us were involved in the study of a copper plate called as Chikurde copper plate. And that record had given a lot of information about various places in the nearby region. This place, Chikurde, is near Kolhapur. And then we could find many sites. We could actually do a reconnaissance study. And then we actually highlighted, we even found a Chalcolithic site over there. So this re-examination of published epigraphs is also very important. I am going to the way ahead portion of the presentation now, where we need to read the epigraphs again and again. Even though they are interpreted, they are translated, and they are published, it is not the end of it. In fact, we should see what has been published, and if you understand the original language, that is Sanskrit or Prakrit, you should cross-check the translations, because in those days, the translations were made by sometimes foreigners, Britishers, or even other people, French people also, and they did their best. Whatever they could do, they have done up to their capacity. But then sometimes if you have the proper knowledge of the language, you can reinterpret, you can retranslate the inscription and bring out something new out of it. A very good study or very good attempt has been made by Professor Sushmita Basu Mazumdar in case of the caves at Barabar in Bihar. As it is out of our context, I am not going to talk about it, but then that is an example or ideal which we should follow, the students should have in their mind when they start studying epigraphy. We should also look for the historical sites, and then if they give us some record like inscriptions or terracotta seals, they also help us in understanding some things of that particular site. Then again, intensive exploration is needed. But then to do this, the prerequisites are mastery over ancient, medieval, and regional scripts and languages. Because all these things are recorded in the form of a script and with the content of some language, and which you should know before studying the inscriptions. Otherwise, you will have to rely upon the English translations, and then only you will be able to understand only some part of it. And if it is faulty, if the translation is not correct, then you will go ahead with the same meaning in your mind. So it is always better to have the study or the expertise over the ancient languages. Then we should also try to study the place names. There is a society which is a formal registered society called as the Place Names Society and Personal Names Society. So you can study the personal names, you can study the place names, you can know about the family of the donor, and like that. Many works have been done in this field, especially in the case of the inscriptions in Maharashtra. We have a book by Dr. Shobhana Gokhale and Purabhilekh Vidya. It's a very important book, a pioneering book, because that is the first book, I think, in Marathi about the inscriptions which are important from the pan-Indian scale. It is not that you have only Maharashtrian inscriptions over there. You have inscriptions from all over the country, which are very important to reconstruct the history of the country. Then my colleague, Mrs. Kalpana Rairikar, and myself, we have brought out a book called as Maharashtraच्या इतिहासाचे साक्षीदार, शिलालेख आणि ताम्रपट. But again, this has got some limitations because we have given all the inscriptions which were published and which are in the rock-cut caves. We have not touched the inscriptions in temples or even copper plates. Very briefly, we have given an overview of the other parts of the data. Then recently a book by Mahesh Tendulkar has been brought out called as Marathi Sanskrit Shila Lekhancha Vishwat. This particular book mainly deals with the medieval inscriptions which we find in the medieval Peshwa period temples. We know that so many people have worked in this field previously. Even S.G. Tulpule has brought out a very good book on Marathi inscriptions, which actually are found in Maharashtra. V.V. Mirashi, Shobhana Gokhale, and then those so many volumes of Epigraphia Indica. They have, these people and those scholars have done their work. Now the task is upon the future generation to work over here. When we try to see, like here today we are working, ICHR has given us a special project to our department to work on the sources of Yadava dynasty in the form of inscriptions. So we are collecting all the Yadava inscriptions which have got some relation with the Yadava dynasty, and then we are compiling them. So such compilations are also necessary because after the publications of Epigraphia Indica or even ancient corpus, like Mirashi had published the corpus of Shilahara inscriptions or Satvahan Western Kshatrapa, many inscriptions have been found recently also. So it is again a very important work to bring all of them together under one roof. So dynastic compilations of inscriptions can also be done, which can be done by the next generation. Plus various inscriptions are scattered, regional inscriptions which, like for example, inscriptions from Satara district. So that such works can also be done in near future. And of course you have to learn and interpret ancient inscriptions also. You can see the sites, place names which are mentioned in the ancient inscriptions, and then try to identify them, locate them in the nearby region. Many a times it so happens that the sites have changed their names, or sometimes they have not changed their name at all, like for Nashik. Even though in between it was called as Gulshanabad, today again we call it Nashik or Nasik. So like in 2nd century BC also it was called as Nashik, and today also it is called as Nashik. So in this way we can see that ancient sites sometimes retain their names. Sometimes there are places like Junnar. The name of this place we do not know. Even though some people have argued that this is Dhenukakata, it is not convincing. And Junnar is mentioned as Junni Nagar, meaning an old site. But what was the real name of Junnar, we do not know. So there are such problems also which have to be tackled while studying the inscriptions. And there are many more also, but I won't take much of your time. And if you have any questions, we'll discuss later on also. I thank again the organizers for giving me this opportunity for sharing my thoughts in brief about this topic called as inscriptions in Maharashtra. Thank you.